The old station wagon rumbled down the dusty road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, four friends, young and foolish, joked nervously. They were on their way to the Monroe Demon House, a place of legend and fear. As they neared the house, the air grew heavy. The joking stopped.
Who believes in ghosts anyway?
But her voice shook. In the back, John and Emily exchanged worried glances. No one believed in ghosts, not really. But something about the house drew them in, a morbid curiosity. The car creaked to a stop in front of the dilapidated house. Silence. They had arrived. The house loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Its windows, like empty eyes, stared back at them. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The laughter from moments ago felt like a distant memory.
"Let's do this,"
he said, his voice a little too loud in the stillness. They stepped out of the car into the oppressive darkness. The air hung thick and heavy, filled with the smell of damp earth and decay. Each footstep on the overgrown path crunched loudly, the only sound besides their ragged breathing. As they approached the porch, the front door creaked open as if inviting them in. Inside, the house was shrouded in a darkness so complete it felt almost tangible. The shadows seemed to cling to every corner, every piece of furniture, as if they were alive. The air was cold, unnaturally so. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, making you shiver uncontrollably. It felt as though the house itself was breathing out a frigid breath. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of their flashlights, swirling lazily as if mocking their intrusion. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling.
Hello? Is anyone there?
Sarah's voice echoed in the emptiness, thin and afraid. It was as if the house swallowed her words, leaving only a haunting reverberation. There was no reply, only the faint rustling of unseen things. The sound was unsettling, like the whisper of something just out of sight. They moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. Each step seemed to amplify the eerie silence, making their presence feel intrusive. Each room was emptier than the last, stripped of furniture yet filled with an oppressive presence. It was as if the house was watching them, waiting for something.
"Did you hear that? It sounded like a whisper,"
he asked, his voice tight with fear. The tension in the air was palpable, making it hard to breathe. Emily shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. She wanted to deny it, to believe it was just their imagination, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. But Sarah was sure she heard it too, a whisper of something cold and evil. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very walls, a chilling reminder that they were not alone. They found themselves in a small room at the back of the house. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. The air here was colder, if possible, and the oppressive darkness seemed to press down on them. Every breath they took felt like inhaling ice, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own.
"This feels wrong. I don't think we should be here,"
Emily whispered, her voice trembling. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them, and a shiver ran down her spine. But John, caught up in the thrill of fear and bravado, was already setting up the Ouija board they had brought. His hands moved with a mix of excitement and nervous energy.
"Let's see if we can contact whatever is in here. Maybe we'll get some answers tonight,"
he said, his voice artificially bright. He was trying to mask his own fear, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. The others hesitated, a flicker of unease passing between them. They exchanged nervous glances, each one silently questioning if this was a good idea. But John had already placed his fingers on the planchette. His determination was unwavering, even if his heart was pounding in his chest.
"Is anyone there? Can you hear us?"
he asked, his voice echoing in the silence. The planchette twitched, sending a jolt of fear through the group. They held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Section 5. A cold wind blows.
The planchette moved slowly at first, then faster and faster, whirling across the board as if propelled by an unseen force. The temperature in the room plummeted. A cold wind whipped around them, though the windows were nailed shut. The hairs on Sarah's arms stood on end. She felt a presence in the room with them, something dark and malevolent. It was feeding off their fear, growing stronger. "Stop it, John," she whispered, her voice raw with terror.
But John was transfixed, his eyes glued to the board. The planchette spelled out a single word: leave. Section 6. Shadowy Figures. The word hung in the air, heavy with menace.
"John, pale but undeterred, reached out to touch the planchette again. That's when the shadows moved. At the edge of their flashlight beams, shadowy figures flickered and danced. They were tall and gaunt, with long, sharp fingers that scraped against the floor.
Emily screamed, a high-pitched sound that bounced off the walls.
John stumbled back, knocking over the Ouija board. The planchette skittered across the floor and disappeared into the darkness. Section 7. Panic sets in. Panic flooded the room, thick and suffocating. They scrambled towards the door, their flashlights casting wild shadows on the walls. The shadowy figures closed in, their forms shifting and changing in the darkness.
Mark, his face contorted with terror, reached the door first. He fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear.
The shadowy figures were almost upon them, their cold, dead eyes boring into them. They were trapped.
The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on us. The air grew thick and cold, making it difficult to breathe. The shadowy figures pressed closer, their forms indistinct but their intent clear. I could feel their icy claws reaching for me, their touch promising unimaginable pain. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable.
The shadowy figures closed in on the group, their forms shifting and flickering. Their eyes glowed an eerie red in the darkness. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the darkness. Sarah opened her eyes to see John sprawled on the floor, his eyes wide with terror. He was pointing at something behind her, his hand shaking uncontrollably. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. And that's when she saw it. A figure, darker than the surrounding shadows, was standing in the corner of the room. It was taller than a man, with long, jagged claws and eyes that burned with an unholy light.
Oh my God, what is that?
The figure lunged, its claws outstretched. Sarah screamed and threw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The force of its movement shattered the window, sending shards of glass flying. Fresh air flooded the room, a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere. The shadowy figures recoiled from the light, their forms flickering and fading.
Mark, what do we do?
Mark seized the opportunity. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her towards the broken window.
Come on.
He yelled, his voice hoarse with terror. They scrambled through the window, cutting themselves on the jagged glass. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. Their hearts pounded in their chests, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The darkness seemed to close in around them, every shadow a potential threat. They could hear their own ragged breaths, the sound of their feet hitting the ground, and the distant eerie noises that seemed to follow them. Mark threw it into gear and sped away, the old station wagon groaning in protest. The engine roared as they tore down the deserted road, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead but casting long, sinister shadows behind them. As they drove, they could see the shadowy figure in the rearview mirror, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. It was as if the darkness itself had taken form and was pursuing them, relentless and unforgiving. The figure's gaze seemed to pierce through the glass, sending chills down their spines. They never spoke of that night again. The memory was too painful, too terrifying to revisit. Each of them carried the weight of that experience in silence, their eyes haunted by the images they had seen. The bond they shared was forever changed, marked by the horrors they had faced together. But the experience left an indelible mark on their souls. It was a scar that would never fully heal, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of their understanding. They had been touched by something otherworldly, something that defied explanation and logic. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. The encounter had changed them, leaving them with a profound sense of unease. They had glimpsed a world beyond their own, a place where nightmares were real and the rules of reality no longer applied. And in the end, they knew one thing for sure. The Monroe Demon House was truly haunted. The stories they had heard, the legends that had been passed down, were all true. The house was a place of malevolent energy, a gateway to something dark and sinister. The car screeched to a halt at a gas station miles away. The sudden stop jolted them back to reality, the bright lights of the station a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. They were safe for now, but the fear still clung to them like a second skin. They stumbled out, gasping for air, their clothes torn and bloodied. The physical toll of their ordeal was evident. but it was the emotional and psychological scars that ran deeper. They leaned against the car, trying to catch their breath, their minds racing with the events of the night.
Let's never come back here. The words were spoken with a finality that left no room for argument. It was a vow, a promise to themselves and each other that they would never again set foot near that cursed place.
Emily choked out, her voice trembling. The fear in her eyes was mirrored in the faces of her friends. They had all been pushed to their limits, and the thought of returning to that house was more than they could bear. The others could only nod, too shaken to speak. Their silence was a testament to the terror they had experienced. Words seemed inadequate to express the depth of their fear and the relief of having escaped with their lives. They piled back into the car, each lost in their own terrified thoughts. The journey ahead was long, but the distance offered a semblance of safety. They clung to that hope, even as the memories of the night continued to haunt them. As Mark turned the key in the ignition, a child's laughter echoed through the car. It was a sound that didn't belong, a chilling reminder that their ordeal was far from over. It was high-pitched and filled with a chilling glee. Their blood ran cold. They were not alone. The laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a ghostly presence that sent shivers down their spines. The realization hit them all at once. The darkness they had fled was still with them, a sinister force that refused to let go.